Praise the Lord. Welcome to Youth Ministry Unscripted, the Rooted Youth Ministry podcast where we talk real, honest, and raw about youth ministry. My name is Isaiah, and I got my friends with me, Danny and Josh. How y'all doing this morning?
Doing fine.
Doing good. It's a little snowy in Philadelphia.
It's about 68 here. So
yeah,
today, yeah. But Josh and Danny, there seems to be some misunderstanding about the role of youth ministry within the larger context of the church. So this morning, our discussion will be on the role of youth ministry in the larger church. You ready to get real, raw, and honest?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get it. Now, a couple questions that seems to be very prevalent when I think about this topic is, why is youth ministry important? And is youth ministry necessary? And so as we think about those and consider those questions, I want us to just first take time to just build a foundation on why youth ministry is important. What is the biblical and theological foundation that you use for your youth ministry, and how it shapes the way you disciple students?
So biblical foundation. I think first off, I think like youth ministry, like we think of in America, for example, you don't see that in the Bible. You don't see a specific ministry to young people, but I think you have plenty of things that infer some important things about young people. I think, first would be, this usually gets used for family ministry, but Deuteronomy 6 talks about the raising of young people, the teaching of God's law and the teaching of a love of the Lord your God to the younger generation. And that command is given not just to parents, but that command is given to a whole nation of people.
Yeah.
And I think inferred in that is not simply that the command is for parents to speak. I think that's definitely a clear command that parents are called to teach them to their children. Yeah. But the command is put out to this whole group of people. So I think there's a collective responsibility that the next generation be ministered to and taught the gospel. And I think implied in that would be, if parents aren't doing their job, it's, they've certainly not done well, but I think it would imply that other people have a responsibility to do that along with them. Yes. So that's one place that I maybe draw from.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes me think about, there's this one guy that I just kind of read some of his random Twitter posts, and he's a big guy in my circles, and he kind of advocates for getting rid of youth ministry. It's almost like, he has I was a classmate of mine in seminary, and has a big following on social media, some positive, some negative, but says we should get rid of it, and has to be all about family. And in thinking about Deuteronomy 6, definitely there's a call to the family unit, but there's also a call to the Christian community, you said, Josh. And, I think of verses passages like Psalm 78 and the passing of faith to generations, even Matthew 16, go make disciples of all nations. We use that for discipleship and evangelism, but it's also a call to the church, depending on your calling, to make disciples of all people. And so, and then one more verse that I always think about is Judges 2:10. It's a scary verse, but it says the next generation forgot about the Lord after the Joshua generation. And who's going to disciple and care for the next generation? Of course, it's the family unit.
For sure.
But, we need to walk alongside our families and parents too.
That's exactly right. And I know, Josh, you mentioned how there's nothing directly in the scriptures about youth ministry. And then Danny, you mentioned about the gentleman who often talks about just doing away with ministry. have comments said to me as well about how youth ministry is not biblical.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we kind of devalue youth ministry in a larger church context. It's like, if we don't think it's biblical and necessary, then we don't see the value in it. And I think what I hear you all saying, and I think for me personally, like one of the texts that I kind of draw from is 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul is talking to Timothy, where he's saying, man, what you have heard from me, entrust to others. Because we're not simply just trying to make Christians, we're trying to make disciples who are empowered and equipped to go out and make disciples. And so at the heart of what we do is making disciples, regardless if it's children, youth, adults. But in this context, we're talking about youth.
Yeah, you know, I think one thing, you know, just to Danny, what you were talking about earlier, I think there is a circumstance in which I would want to do away with youth ministry, and that's the kind of youth ministry that completely sequesters teenagers off from the rest of the church. I know we're going to get into intergenerational integration and things like that in this conversation, but I would guess that this person's distaste for youth ministry is observation of a style of youth ministry that takes all the teenagers and has an alternative worship service on a Sunday morning. There's no interaction between teenagers and the rest of the church body. And I would say that is unbiblical. You know, the passages like Deuteronomy 6 or in some of the epistles, when you like in Ephesians, when Paul is addressing children, the implication there in all of that is that children are a part of the church. And so I think coupled with this idea of a direct ministry, directly speaking to people at a young age of life, is also the idea that they're not off on their own, just hearing and interacting with other people their age. They're kind of enveloped into the life of the church. So if we were trying to just say we need a teenage church, essentially, then I'd say no, we don't need that. But if along with them being integrated into the larger congregation, we also have spaces in which we speak to the specific time of life that they're in, I think that's important. But I wouldn't say it's so important that we only have that and not have the other.
Yeah. And he was talking about, well, first of all, what you're talking about, Josh, I'm a big advocate for too. There's a diagram that I use a lot called the one-eared Mickey Mouse, which is the church being the youth ministry being segregated out of the of the church, and I don't believe in that either. I think where this gentleman was talking about getting rid of youth ministry is because he's talking about the importance of he's saying that family is the one that disciples kids, and that's where all the youth ministry should be done, is in the family. And I've never spoken to him directly about this because I haven't seen him since seminary except on social media. But I do believe in the importance of family and being the primary disciplers. It's just that I was a father of 3 teenagers, and it's not easy. And I appreciated my youth pastor interns. Even though I was a youth pastor, I had a couple interns. They were walking alongside with me and, helping to disciple my kids with me. And so I see a purpose and value in a both and, not an either or. And
I think there lies sort of like the misunderstanding, right? And I think a lot of youth pastors, a lot of youth ministers are trying to navigate and struggle with this misunderstanding, because I know I struggle with it as well. And I imagine that there are others that struggle with it. It's like this pressure of like, youth are not or should not be in the church service. They should kind of have their own thing because maybe they don't understand what the pastor is saying.
Yeah.
Those things. But I know just like you are, I'm a huge advocate in youth being in worship service with their families, worshiping together, hearing from their pastor. And then we also have other things where we can contextualize and we can, kind of pour in and invest in those young people. But
It's funny. I do want to encourage what you're just saying, Isaiah, and encourage all our listeners and youth pastors. I was just at a big denominational gathering on, it's called Teach Us to Worship, and it was about family worship and
yeah,
including children and youth in the worship. And, it was like it was a symposium. We were all talking about this, and my feelings about it was we're doing this as a denomination because most of our churches don't do it. Not because we're good at it, but because we, using my Philly vernacular, we suck at it. And but it's
yeah,
part of my denomination's theology, of being a covenantal community. I'm hoping I'm not giving away what denomination I am in, but it's supposed to be in our DNA, but we all suck at it. But and that's where maybe youth ministry has been good, but maybe I always say we've been too good. That kids now just go to youth group and they're not being raised up. We're not supporting their family, or
yeah,
they're not being discipled by their parents, and we're just the primary disciple makers because we're doing too good of a job, youth workers.
yeah, yeah.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Kwame, and I have been serving in youth ministry at Centennial Church in Forest Lake, Minnesota, for more than 20 years. I'm also the author of More to the Story: Deep Answers to Real Questions on Attraction, Identity, and Relationships. And I've had the honor to write Rooted's new curriculum on biblical sexuality. It's a 9-week short study that goes through key passages in scripture about the topic of human sexuality. And our hope and prayer with it is that it would help students to see why their sexuality matters so much and how they can honor God with their bodies and their relationships. We also hope and pray that it is a tool for you as you navigate the tough questions that our students are asking with gospel truth.
Well, we definitely got room to grow.
Yeah.
But that relational discipleship piece is important, and as we talk about our role in developing and making disciples of young people, and we recognize, depending on how big our churches are and how many youth that we're serving, that can be a bit of a challenge. And so, which is why trying to raise up other leaders and multiplying ourselves to be in relationship with young people. That's where that intergenerational integration comes into place, which is one of the Rooted's pillars. And so we're not just trying to get youth involved in the life of the church, but we're trying to invite the church to get involved in the lives of the young people that we serve. But we recognize that there's some barriers in that. And so what would you say are the biggest barriers in preventing youth ministry from being fully integrated into the larger church? And how can we overcome this?
Barriers from them being integrated, I think, there's a couple ways you can think about that. One, are we talking about the whole life of the church? We talk about Sunday morning. You want the whole thing or what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, one thing is just sort of self-consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of adults don't know what to do with teenagers.
Yeah.
And so, and they also, I think there's maybe an untrue, like a inaccurate belief that teenagers don't want to talk to them.
Yeah.
And instead, I think the opposite is true. I think teenagers want to have meaningful relationships with adults.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's funny we were talking about this because just this week, I'm taking a bunch of kids to Romania this summer on a mission trip, and we have a woman who's a little older. She's retired, who helps with one of our girls' Bible studies on Sunday nights, and they have convinced her to go with us to Romania. And I told a few of them last night that she was going to go, and they were just so excited about it. And I think that if you don't work with or interact with teenagers on a weekly, daily basis like we might, and you don't maybe have teenagers in your life, like if you're not a parent or something, you kind of have this belief because you watch television and you see these grumpy teenagers that they don't want that. I think that's really not true. So I think breaking through some self-consciousness on the part of adults who could have a voice with teenagers, I think that's a big barrier for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and kind of like that phenomenon, Josh, that you're talking about. Like, there's a great book. It's more like an academic book, but it's about the history of youth ministry. There's actually a church history of youth ministry by Mark Sentner called When God Shows Up. And when I look at the history of youth ministry, why it was founded and created and developed, it was the church having a heart for teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow along the way, probably more in the last 30, 40 years, like I joked around earlier, we've been doing too good of a job in youth ministry and become a separate entity. And I think one of the barriers is I love my senior pastor. I served at our church for 29 years as the youth pastor, but I think they just see youth ministry separate too. And I'm rooted also as a family mentoring program. We're mentoring pastors to do family ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, Isaiah is in charge of the mentoring. One of the things we try to get them to do is set a mission and vision at their church for family ministry. And the first people you got to convince is your senior leadership and your senior pastor to, do more family and intergenerational integration. And that's, at least for my mentees, I think for the other mentors and their mentees, it's hard to convince your senior leadership and senior pastor. That's a big barrier to even doing, integrating, to be a youth ministry that's integrated into the church. And again, like you said, Josh, teenagers want relationships. And I think, the church needs to do that too. It's important.
I think one more thing that I would say on that is, and this may be a problem we create for ourselves at times, or maybe you're a youth minister who has inherited this, and it would be kind of like turning a big ship to change it. But I really think that having a youth ministry service during a corporate church service is a bad idea. I think something that communicates that teenagers need to have their very own worship service as an alternative to the Sunday morning worship gathering. I think that's the biggest opportunity for the church to get together in all of its generations. And if we say teenagers can't handle the seriousness or the stylistic differences or whatever it is that makes, like what I would say our worship service for teenagers, that's our midweek gathering. Yeah, maybe the music, the instrumentation's a little more rock and roll feeling, and some of the song selection is a little more contemporary than we might do. But man, it's so important, I think, for them to be there on a Sunday morning. And I think one of the biggest barriers would just be if you had something like that, how do you get any kind of interaction if that's your best opportunity for them all to be worshiping together? So I think that could be a barrier if that exists at your church.
Yeah, that's especially when we think about that intergenerational integration, and we consider the question, like, how can we just create, as the church, create environments where students naturally connect with older, more seasoned believers? Sunday worship.
Yeah.
That's the most natural environment where we can foster that intergenerational integration, where those older believers can really invest and pour into the life and just be present with young people, and develop and nurture and build those relationships. Now, we often hear about the statistics and the realities of like young people as they age out of youth group, not only just leaving the church but leaving the faith. And one of the things that I would love to ask you all is, like, how can youth pastors and church leadership work together to ensure that students remain engaged in their faith beyond youth group, beyond high school? Now, there's things that we can't control, and because we know that young people have to take ownership of their own faith, They have to trust and believe in Jesus themselves. But what are some things that we can do, youth pastors in leadership?
Well, I think a lot of the studies and research, based on the Bible that we talked about, the biblical truths, show that this idea of intergenerational integration is probably one of the biggest factors, at least why kids remain in their faith, their connection to their church, their connection to their families and parents, intergenerational Sunday corporate worship. At least the research has shown, in the last 15, 20 years, this connection with the church and parents has been the biggest factor in kids remaining in faith after worship. Of course, there's things we can do, like, for example, in my youth group, we had like a college ministry and a young adult ministry. So like in their junior and senior years, I had the college pastor and the young adult pastor come and connect with the youth group, come to some meals, come to some events, connect with their kids. So their segue into their next ministry would be smoother, and we do stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely things you can do when they go away to college, adults writing letters and keep connections with them. But I still feel, the biblical truth is there. And then the research the last 15, 20 years is showing these intergenerational connections while they're in youth group is really important.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I think at least in part, well, at least for our youth ministry, a lot of our kids go away to college. And so we'll have a handful that stick around and stay in the Nashville area, but by and large, they're going somewhere else, which means they're going to be kind of having to figure out how to continue in their faith, on their own. So I would think about it in a couple of maybe phases, and one would be the build up, which would be the development and cultivation of relationships between students and people who are meaningful adults in their life. So the small group leader, the Sunday school teacher, that kind of thing. So that's happening that whole 6-7 years, if they're in their youth ministry that long. We have kind of a preparation phase. So senior year, we have a once a month alternative Sunday school class where they can come and talk about everything that's related to, post high school life. And a part of that is, how do I maintain my faith? How do I find a healthy church? We just did that on our last session. And then they're supposed to go research churches in the area that they're going to be moving to and have a plan and that kind of stuff. So we definitely do that. And then I think the follow up. So our small group leaders follow their kids through multiple years of youth ministry. So they follow them maybe all the way through the whole time or through high school or whatever. And then once they graduate, like my wife is the senior girls leader. She's been with those girls since they were in the 7th grade. And what she'll do is she'll take a much deserved year off starting in the fall. But she's not off because a part of what she will be entrusted to is keeping up with those students as they begin their college career. So texting them and saying, did you find a church? Is there anything I can help you with? Do you have any questions about your faith? And so that those relationships continue and that there's some kind of handoff. The hope is that they're going to find a church, a body of believers that they can be both serving in and being fed in as they continue on. So that's kind of the hope, I think, for that.
And that's a great idea. And I took this from Fuller Youth Institute, where thinking about youth ministry, like I had the kids from 7th, 12th grade, but it's not just those 6 years, but we call it 6+2. at least the first 2 years out of youth group, we're keeping in touch with them, making sure that they're, doing well in their faith, and
Mm-hmm.
texting them,
Yeah.
helping them find churches and things like that. That the youth group doesn't just end after 12th grade, but it continues, and that's part of. I always preach my ecclesiology to the kids, that the most important time of youth group is after you leave youth group. So I'm harping on that too. There's 6 years during youth group. I joke around. I don't care what you do during youth group. Most important time of youth group is when you leave youth group. You know,
That's
lifelong
right.
faith. It's kind of like my fake ecclesiology there.
One of the most alarming trends we're seeing in teenagers today is the prevalence of anxiety. If one of your children or a teenager you know is struggling with anxiety, we are thrilled to share a resource to help. Rooted's 2023 book release with PNR Publishing, Anxiety: Finding a Better Story. It's a 31-day devotional for teenagers written by mental health counselor and friend of Rooted, Liz Edrington. As a teenager, Liz felt overwhelmed by anxiety. Now that she's a mental health counselor, she wants to pass on what she's learned. Just understanding what anxiety is makes a big difference. But what makes an even bigger difference is understanding what God has to say about it. With daily scripture readings, breathing exercises, and additional mental health resources, this little book offers comfort and help for teenagers in the midst of their anxiety. We invite them to see how their anxiety fits into God's big story and to learn how Jesus can bring peace.
Y'all laid out some great practical things. I know Danny, talking about that intergenerational integration. I think naturally, the easiest and simplest way is that Sunday morning, but also thinking about intergenerational integration even outside of Sunday morning. Okay, what does that look like on Wednesday nights or Sunday evenings when we're gathering young people? Like, thinking in those terms as well. And then Josh, some of the practical things that you mentioned, like having young people research churches in the area where they'll be going to college. I think that is a fantastic idea.
That's great.
And then I know for me, when I went to college, like those ministries, those college ministries on campus became a huge community, a huge resource for me. And so, encouraging those young people to consider and think about that as well. And then also encouraging those adult leaders to stay connected while those young people are off and away from college.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, if they serve those young people from 9th grade until they graduated, or however long that they serve, but just periodically checking in and just connecting with those. I think those are some great practical things that we could consider. And I hope that the listeners could incorporate some of those things within their ministries as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Now, we talked about just sort of the role of youth ministry in a larger church. We talked about some very practical things, setting a foundation, and then talking about intergenerational integration and how we can encourage that and emphasize that within the larger church context, and then those practical things. And so we can kind of end with, I guess, sort of a lighter discussion. And so, I would love to kind of pick you all's brain on what is your favorite youth ministry sweet or dessert? What's your favorite youth ministry sweet or dessert?
Yeah. So for me, I just think about we did this like a couple times a year. It's just a classic Sunday bar. Like, get a bunch of ice cream, lay it out, put some chocolate, strawberry toppings, caramel toppings, and then like M&Ms, walnuts and stuff. You got to be careful of nut allergies these days.
Yeah.
But I love doing that and just picking out on ice cream. And I always like, because I always sometimes I do the shopping for that, and I get to take home the leftovers and make my own ice cream dessert bar at home too for a couple days.
Yeah.
It was just very easy, simple. Kids always loved it and loved eating, and then taking home the leftovers afterwards. So That was always my favorite.
You know, Daddy, I used to always tell them to take it home. Maybe I should have followed, you know.
I don't want to get in trouble with parents, but yeah. But yeah, that was good. That's more generous. You have a bigger heart than me, Isaiah.
Yeah, we have a family at our church that when we have a special event, they'll bring this stuff called coffee punch, which is basically like melted chocolate ice cream and like half and half, and like instant coffee and that kind of thing all mixed together. I mean, it is like drinking melted ice cream, basically.
Wow.
What we're doing. It is. I can't imagine what the calorie count is on like a little 6-ounce glass of that, but it is quite good. So that's probably my favorite thing. Yeah.
You know, I would say, oftentimes, like, I would be the one that's kind of bringing those things, those desserts, those treats to the youth group. And one of the things that was very meaningful, and I think that I appreciated, is when a young person would just randomly bring things. And a lot of times it would be like cookies that they baked.
Yeah.
But I think, it just kind of shows the heart of that young person, where they just saw that it was important to bake something, and not only bake it, but bring it to share with the group. And those are like, so I don't necessarily have a favorite dessert or treat, but I did appreciate those moments where a young person would bake something and then bring it. Now, assuming that they actually baked it and didn't buy it, but yeah. But I trust that they baked it. Yeah, I did appreciate that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, I appreciate the discussion, and I pray that the listeners were blessed by it. And one of the things that I want to do as we close is just encourage those listeners to don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. And we look forward to the next time, where we will talk about discipling students in a culture of busyness. It's going to be a good one. Discipling students in a culture of busyness. And I just want to leave those listeners with this, just an encouragement, just in remembering that your work is not in vain, that Jesus is building his church, and he has invited you to join him in the work that he is doing. The gospel is still changing lives, and his love will never fail us. Thanks for listening to the Youth Ministry Unscripted podcast, the Rooted Youth Ministry podcast, where we talk real, honest, and raw about gospel-centered youth ministry. Until next time, God bless you.